Thank you for coming. I'd like to welcome everyone to the MBA track of the First Pitch Sports Business Case Competition, presented this year by MLB Advanced Media. I want to first thank our sponsors for graciously providing support for this event, and also allowing us to run a second track this year for the undergraduates, something that we've been wanting to do for a long time. So this morning we'll see some teams from some of the top MBA schools in the world. Later, after lunch, like I said, 3 undergraduate teams will compete on their own track for the first time in history. This year's MBA case focuses on growing the MLB.TV business model. For those of you unfamiliar, MLB.TV is the first internet-based live video offering from any sports league. Started in 2002, it has grown to be one of the most successful of its kind. So naturally, when trying to figure out what question to ask the MBAs, we said, make it better. So what should the optimal model to continue growing this business? How should they mix subscriptions versus ad revenue? And our MBA teams did an excellent job at answering these questions in many different ways. Unfortunately, of the 39 teams, we could only pick 3. As much as I would love to have every team present and take up the entirety of the conference, it's just not possible. And as you can guess, at least the first school, we have 3 excellent schools: Chicago Booth, the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth, and Columbia Business School. So just to give little rules for everyone else in the audience, each team will be given 10 minutes to present their ideas and findings to the esteemed panel of judges. And then they'll be given about 5 minutes of Q&A from the judges. So now I want to introduce our esteemed panel. First, we have the Senior VP of Multimedia and Distribution at MLB Advanced Media, Joe Inzerillo. We also have the Senior VP of Business Development at MLB Advanced Media, Kenny Gersh. The VP of Ticketing at MLB Advanced Media, Mark Plutzer. We have the VP of Team Marketing and Business Operations for the NBA, Valerie Camillo. And finally, the COO of the Massachusetts Department of Medicaid and loyal first pitch judge, Corbin Petro. So let's get to the presentations. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to our first team representing the Chicago Booth School of Business, Michael Grease, Jonathan Hay, and Habo Liu.
Hi, everyone. Thanks a lot for being here. I'm John Hay, and along with Michael Grease and Habo Liu, we are the team from Chicago Booth. And like I said, it's a real honor, so thanks a lot for the opportunity. I'd like to start by just walking the audience through kind of a mental exercise. So imagine that you're a kid, you live with your family, it's the summer, and you're heading to visit your grandparents. And you are excited, because your grandpa is a huge baseball fan, and so are you. Every time you visit, he takes you to see a game. And you love going to baseball games. You love the crack of the bat, the roar of the crowd, you love hot dogs. But mostly, you like spending time with your grandpa. And that's one of the things that baseball does for us. It has us spend time together with our family and our loved ones. But times change, right? So maybe your grandparents retire and move south. Maybe your parents get a transfer. Maybe you go off to college. And it gets harder and harder to follow your team and to maintain those bonds with your grandpa and with your loved ones through the shared passion of baseball. Fortunately, now MLB TV allows fans who move around the country to continue connecting with their team and with other people through their team. But there's a lot of questions about that. So, how do we think about the advertising mix for this business? How do we think about who we target demographically speaking? How do we think about the lifetime value of a customer? And maybe most pressingly, how do we think about how much it should cost? So on that point, I'd like to introduce Michael, who's going to talk to you about how we price MLB TV.
Thanks, John. So in our case materials, we received information about the annual prices for MLB TV. However, we don't think annual prices are the correct way to think about price. You see, the value of the product diminishes as fewer and fewer days remain in the season. Therefore, we think the correct way to think about price is price per day. And you can see on our graphs how price per day has fluctuated over the last 2 seasons. So by looking at price per day, we have a unique data point for each day of the season, and we combine this with the sales information to develop a rich data set that we're able to analyze. And what we're interested in determining is the price elasticity of demand. What we did is we created a log-log multivariate regression model. We created dummy variables for the start of spring training, which is represented by the green dots on our graph, and the start of the regular season, which is represented by the blue dots on our graph. Now, the regression line predicts how sales on any given day will fluctuate with the price per day for that day. Our analysis showed that MLB TV in 2011 and 2012 was priced on the elastic part of the demand curve. What this means is for a given, or a 1% change in price, it'll let us know the expected percentage change in sales. And because it's priced on the elastic part of the demand curve, if we decrease price by 1%, we expect sales to increase by more than 1%. So therefore, we recommend decreasing the price of MLB TV. Now, we can't say exactly what the optimal price will be because we don't have data points for lower price per day numbers. We can say it'll be strictly lower than 26 cents per day, which is the lowest price that was tested in 2012. This equates to a price of $48.10 for the season. And at this price, we would expect about 3.9 million new subscribers for the season.
Thanks, Michael. So as Michael alluded to, there's obviously additional, so if you're on this elastic part of the curve, there's additional revenue from subscriptions. There's other methods through which this flows through. So on the advertising front, obviously more subscriptions means more eyeballs means more advertising revenue. We were pretty cautious on this part of our analysis, largely because of the fact that about 75% of the current advertising inventory is going unsold. So we're not completely convinced in the infrastructure is in place to fully monetize these additional subscriptions into advertising revenue. There is some low-hanging fruit here in terms of sort of repricing some of the existing inventory to smooth advertising demand. But overall, we kind of view the advertising component as difficult to measure, definitely a net positive, but more of an additional point supporting our general argument, but not necessarily a point in and of itself. So more important than that, we want to talk about the externalities associated with MLB TV subscriptions. So you see from the graph there, about a third of MLB team revenues come from ticket sales, and about 3/4 in aggregate come from local mediums. So broadcasts, concessions, ticket sales, sponsorships. A very small part of these come from the internet. So what this says to us is that we should be thinking about MLB TV as a method of driving increased fandom. So a sort of analog here is Amazon Prime. So if someone has Amazon Prime, Amazon has to send them packages for free. This is much more than offset by the fact that the average Prime customer spends about 2.5 times as much as the average non-Prime customer. The corollary here is an MLB TV family that goes to one more game a year, which already exceeds the revenue of the subscription as it's currently priced. On top of that, there's a trickle-down effect to the future generations of fans whose parents might bring them to games. This is especially important in light of the fact that there's definitely, we see the demographics for the MLB moving away from younger generations. Little League participation is down about 24% in the last decade, while football and ice hockey are up by a similar amount. So having said that we're going to get more subscribers, who are they? So to think about the demographics, we looked at a baseline versus baseball share. So we looked at a baseline of internet users versus MLB.com users, the baseline of smartphone users versus MLB TV users, and then MLB.com users versus MLB TV users. We basically looked at the spread in the demographics here to kind of identify where some of these people are not being converted at the rate they could be. The big takeaways here, so the youth definitely showed up here. By far the single biggest outlier were the elderly. Especially if you notice particularly on conversion from MLB.com to MLB TV, we're converting the elderly right now at a very poor rate. This says to us that there are people who are fans of baseball who are going on the internet, but we're not taking that last step right now to get them onto our service. So next here's Haiba to explain why we're going after a demographic which is not traditionally valued in many businesses. Every time.
Click. Thanks, John. As John said, we really feel like there's a great opportunity here for MLB to go after the elderly demographic. Why is that? Well, we feel that it's a large and growing segment of the market. According to the 2010 US Census, the elderly are growing at a much faster rate than the rest of the US population, especially in males between the ages of 65 and 75, which are growing at almost double the rate of the rest of the country. Many of the elderly are retired, so they have lots of free time and more disposable income than the rest of the population. Only about 12% of the elderly fall below the poverty line versus 19% for the rest of the country. And the elderly were around during the golden years of baseball, and we feel that there's a much higher conversion rate. It's much easier to convert them. But most importantly, we feel that the elderly gives us an opportunity to connect with the young, to connect with their kids. Who doesn't remember going to baseball games with their grandparents? And it's really a great opportunity for baseball to sort of target the younger generation. So what should the MLB do? We feel like they should roll out a national ad campaign, perhaps partnered with the AARP, to provide promotions and discounts beyond the traditional senior discount. An example could be during spring training, offering free trials of MLB TV or greatly discounted prices to take advantage of the people living in Arizona and Florida. Promotions to bring the family to the ballpark. As John said, most of the revenue is local, so getting people to the park is a big deal, and running promotions to bring the family would be a great idea. And really offering incentives for the elderly to purchase MLB TV as a gift for their kids and grandkids. And perhaps doing sort of a joint bundling or offering social media tools and features that allow families to watch games together even though they're in different parts of the country. So we've talked about several recommendations that we give, but we feel that without metrics to measure success, they're sort of useless because what good is a recommendation if you can't tell how well it does? So on that note, the foundation that we want to look at are quantitative measures of growth, benchmarked against historic rates. That gives us a good idea to see how we're doing. The two primary pillars are going to be revenue and number of subscribers, because those are a direct result of our recommendations. But as my colleagues have said, really it's the positive externalities that we feel are more important. So from there, we can look at ticket sales, merchandising, TV ratings, ad metrics such as reach and share of voice, and even things like Little League participation. But overall, what is the primary goal? The primary goal, create more fans. The ultimate goal of MLB TV should be to make more baseball fans, so the metric that it should be measured against is how many new fans can it create. So in summary, our recommendations are lower prices, an adjusted advertising mix, and targeting the elderly demographic. The story that we told at the beginning of our presentation, that's not a hypothetical. I moved to this country when I was 4, and when I got here, I remember growing up just how difficult it was to adjust culturally. But I also remember going with my grandpa to games. I remember going to Phillies games and cheering on Dykstra and Dalton. And I remember at those games, I felt normal. I felt like just any other kid. And that was so special to me. Now that's my story, but my story is not unique. We all have stories, and as do many of you in the audience, and it's these stories that make us love baseball and make us love sports. Sports comes from the family. It's generational. It's passed from generation to generation. So for the future of baseball, how do we create the next generation of baseball fans? Well, we do it by making MLB TV more accessible, and we do it through targeting the elder statesmen, those who remember just how magical going to the ballpark is. Thank you.
So one of the things that you guys were talking about is the population. You base the elderly targeting based upon documentation from how many folks have internet access. One question is, MLB.TV is a high-speed internet thing. And so when you look at the blend of high-speed internet access versus just regular internet access, I think the numbers look a little bit different. Is that something you guys took into account?
So it's not something that we factor into this model, so it's a really good point, and it probably changed the numbers somewhat. We do think that, especially because a lot of these demographics, you saw a lot of the big points there were even 45 to 50, 55 to 65, so certainly I think that's more true as you get higher and higher in that sort of spectrum. But we think there's also, even within the high-speed sort of framework, there's still a lot of opportunity here. But it's a really good point and something we should layer on top.
Hi. My question was about the price per day calculation you were doing and saying that, I guess your point was at the lower price per day, more people were signing up, and therefore we should consider lowering the price. If I understood your chart correctly, was it showing that the lower price per day was predominantly at the beginning of the season? That's when the price per day was lower and more people were signing up?
Right, so price per day changes as fewer and fewer days remain in the season. It also changes as you guys have made periodic price adjustments. So a lot of times at the beginning or end of a month, there'll be a price adjustment. And so in our graph, you saw it would generally increase as fewer and fewer days remain, and then there would be a drop-off due to price adjustment. There was also 2 troughs in the 2012 graph, which were the two-day sales. And so because there was so much variation, that's kind of really what empowered our analysis.
Right. Okay, and I guess my question is, did you take into account at all the fact that I guess our price per day was lowest, sort of as you were saying at the beginning of the season, but that's also when a predominant amount of our sales were, which may be due more to timing than price. And how does that play out? Like if we had potentially charged more early in the season, but that's when people were buying it, it may have had showed a different sort of phenomenon.
Right. The influxes in demand we saw were at the start of spring training and the start of the regular season, and so we accounted for that in our regression. We created dummy variables with they were binary variables, one for the days around the start of spring training, one for the days around the start of the regular season. So we were trying to control for those influxes of demand at certain times and get the true price elasticity of demand.
You talked about leveraging MLB TV to drive fandom and revenues in the local market, but many folks buy this product so that they can watch their away team. So, you know, I live in New York. My husband, he's a Pittsburgh Pirates fan. We bought it so that we can watch Pirates games. So how do you anticipate local revenues to be driven? Are you anticipating that when we go back to Pittsburgh, we'd stay engaged, or is that going to drive us to go see the Mets or the Yankees?
So we feel actually that that's absolutely true, and I think the main purpose of MLB TV is both to drive fandom at the local level, but also just for baseball in general. And our thinking on this is, imagine that there's someone who's from New York who moves to LA. We feel that there could also be someone from LA who's moved to New York, and those two sort of offset each other a little bit. So when you're watching Yankees games versus watching Dodgers games, probably more likely maybe when the Yankees come to play or when the teams play each other, you're more likely to go to the ballpark. And just in general, sort of driving more interest, I guess, in baseball, in addition to both at the local ballpark and also when you go back to your home market.
The other question I have is, you know, one of the assumptions that's in the modeling that you guys are doing, which is an interesting assumption, is the notion of infinite demand. And so when we start to reduce the price this much, the subscriber numbers look impressive from an overall, that's what the target is, but there's also enormous amounts of risk in that. Because obviously if 3 million people don't show up, then the model inverts very quickly. Like, what do you guys think about the risk-reward side of it? Because there's an element of risk of finding those subscribers, and the cost of acquisition of those customers might be much higher as you get further down the demand curve.
Right. So yeah, the way we thought about it is the number of people who view baseball either on TV or the ballpark every year is much larger than the number of subscribers we're projecting. And clearly, when we looked at the days where there was low price per day, there's a ton of latent demand of people who are willing to buy at a lower price point. I think on one of the 2-day sales, new subscribers on that day was over 50,000. So we're not predicting that would be the case every day, but it just goes to show that we think there's a lot of people out there who are price sensitive, who you'll be able to capture by lowering the price.
And I think to your point, I think we did a bit of a sanity check as well. So, you know, I think if you keep going on that curve, you start getting numbers that you have to really defend them. And also, if you're putting that much value in such an extreme number, then it's a bit risky. We sort of felt that given the current sort of subscribership and given the current fandom of baseball, that we could sort of justify, you know, that addition of subscribers at that price point. So, but it is absolutely a concern.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we have the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth, represented by Chuck Culp, John Ryder, and Dave Sibley.
John, let me stand on the other side of you. Sure. All right, good morning. Thanks so much for having us here. We're excited to share our conclusions with you and talk a little bit about our analysis. I'm Chuck Culp. I'm a Cincinnati Reds fan. That's John Ryder. He's a Boston Red Sox fan. And that's Dave Sibley. He loves the Chattanooga Lookouts. And one of the things we picked up as we dove into the case was what a great business this is. And so thinking about kind of the situation here, our estimate, kind of operating model, produced an estimate of $120 million in revenue, which is about 70% subscription and 30% advertising. And one of the ways we know this is a great business is that you're actually able to grow while raising prices on your core customer. And that's something that a lot of businesses would like to be able to do. But we have 4 recommendations for you. The first kind of relates to that. We actually think core customers are fairly price insensitive, and you can continue to raise base rate subscription pricing for the foreseeable future. Second, we think you can better optimize your advertising model, and we think you can lower prices and actually double ad revenue. Third, we think you can run promotions to shift more subscribers to earlier in the season, which will boost revenue by getting people in the funnel earlier and growing advertising revenue. And finally, We think there's an exciting opportunity to do more to target the younger demographic, which represents not only an attractive kind of current revenue opportunity, but the future generation of baseball fans. So now I'm going to hand it off to John, who's going to talk a little bit about our model and some of our revenue analysis.
Thanks, Chuck. Good morning, everyone. We can return to this slide when there are further questions, but in summary, the key assumptions that underlie our analysis pertain to the mix of full season and monthly subscription sales over the course of the year, the subscriber usage pattern, the viewership behavior of different groups of subscribers, and then some simple arithmetic assumptions regarding ad revenue. Given these assumptions, we were able to construct a monthly operating model consisting of revenue derived from monthly and full season subscriptions, as well as advertising revenue. And as Chuck noted, we estimate that the business generated about $120 million in revenue in 2012, up almost 50% year over year, and about 30% of that came from advertising. Next, we looked at the lifetime value of a customer acquired at different points in the season. And I'll draw your attention to the chart in the lower left there. This highlights the season-long value of a customer acquired in different months of the season. And as you can see, obviously people coming in earlier in the season create more value. In particular, the amount of advertising revenue associated with a preseason customer is almost 3 times that of someone who comes in the middle of the season. And on the right, the chart on the right is a measure of the value that the subscription has to each customer on a price per day throughout the remaining season as they join the platform throughout the season. Next, we also analyzed the price sensitivity of different segments of your customer base, except we separated out core customers and then those that came through during the promotion periods. This effort yielded 2 primary conclusions. One is that your core customers, core early season subscription customers, seem to be relatively price inelastic. This is based on year-over-year price changes and the fact that you raised price and grew volumes by healthy growth rates. Second, we found that promotions were highly effective, that by lowering prices for short periods of time, you brought a lot of new volume into the business, and yet, if I draw your attention to the lower right there, there was no evidence of cannibalization of full price subscription sales in the periods immediately following those promotions. So as a result, we recommend continuing to raise early season pricing, base pricing on modest levels, and then probably grow promotional activities, particularly early in the season. With that, I'll turn it back over to Chuck to discuss advertising revenue.
Thanks, John. So one of the things we noticed when we looked at advertising revenue was the kind of ranges in utilization across the different ad formats, and we wanted to figure out why that was happening. And the way we looked at that was to try to figure out a metric that would help us understand the value to the advertiser, who's your customer here on the advertising model. And what we've got on this slide is basically 2 graphs showing the same data, just cut 2 different ways. On the top chart, you see in the blue bars the value to the customer, and the metric we used there was the pixels, so the size of the advertising divided by the average price that we estimated you charged. And on the red line, you see the utilization, or the amount of inventory that was sold of that format. And as you can see, where the value to the customer is the highest, the utilization is the highest. So in the second chart on the bottom, you've got a similar data set, and we figured we had to throw in at least 1 R² because this is a sports analytics conference. But you can see the same relationship here, whereas the value to the customer, and by that I mean the advertiser, which is the horizontal axis, increases, utilization increases as well. And we also use this regression to help us figure out what market clearing prices would be for all your inventory and what that would mean for your overall revenue. And that's what this slide looks at. So if you look at the blue bars, you see what your current CPM is. And if you look at the red bars, you see what our regression estimate of the market clearing CPM would be. The box just to the right of that shows you kind of current utilization and pricing and our inventory clearing pricing. And the key conclusion there is that we think you could lower CPMs by 20 to 60% and actually double your advertising revenue. Now, the key caveat to that is, and I know we've got a judge who probably knows something about this, is that there is value in that remnant ad space, but the key question is how much value is there for MLB, and how much would they be willing to pay internally for these spots? And if that value is greater than these pricing, obviously you would want to adjust the analysis. Now I'm going to hand it over to Dave, who will talk about demographics.
Great, thanks, Chuck. So next finding we want to discuss is that MLB TV has relatively low penetration among younger demographics, primarily 18 to 25-year-olds. So we focused on thinking about MLB TV subscriptions relative to the at-bat iPhone sales and visitors to the website. And we found that the younger demographic makes up about 18% of the overall market. And then in the middle, when we look at penetration rates, we see an overall penetration rate estimated at about 46%, while the younger demographics are significantly lower. Here, 9% for the 18 to 21-year-olds and 26% for the 22 to 25-year-olds. Further, the growth among this demographic is lagging. So as we see, the overall growth was very healthy for MLB TV at 56%. However, in the 18 to 25-year-olds, that was below that average. So we think there's a real opportunity for MLB TV to aggressively target this demographic. So we think MLB TV should aggressively price discount to this demographic. Some further rationale, we believe that 18 to 25-year-olds are likely to be more price sensitive, given their limited purchasing power. We also think they are more tech savvy and therefore will be more likely to be comfortable watching watching television on non-traditional means. We also think it's a demographic that you can easily segment and target. So the primary tactic we think is student discounts, leveraging .edu email addresses to give discounts to students. We also think there's some opportunities to have stronger partnerships with console manufacturers. In the bottom left, we have a pro forma example of how a price reduction could actually increase revenue. So here we see this demographic generates about $8.3 million per year today. In increasing that, the growth rate, the demographic, to the average of 56%, that drives up revenue significantly. We think that would have to happen at a price reduction, so decline in revenue due to the decreased price. But in the end, we think that could increase revenue by about $4 million per year. And as you see on the after, that's primarily driven by the increased ad sales generated from the larger subscriber base. And on the right, there's a sensitivity with different price points and different market penetrations in general, for the vast majority of them, that shows positive revenue. So just to wrap it up, review the 4 key recommendations. First, we think the consumer is relatively price inelastic and think MLB TV has the opportunity to continue modest price increases on the base product. Second is the use of promotions to target the more price-sensitive consumer and also to try to shift consumers to earlier in the season. Third, Chuck discussed the opportunity to optimize advertising revenue and sell more of that ad space. And then again, the opportunity to target the 18 to 25-year-old demographic. A couple of other things that we think MLB TV should keep in mind. One would be the opportunity to give away MLB TV for free. We don't think that's a good idea at this point. Most of the revenue comes from subscribers. We think they are relatively price inelastic. But as the percentage of revenue that comes from advertising increases, we think that's something that MLB TV should continue to monitor. Next, just the use of more promotional weeks, free weeks, any way to get more people in the fold. This gives MLB TV, generates more excitement among fans, but also gives MLB TV more insight into what is the overall size of the market. If you give it away for free, how many subscribers will you have? And lastly, as I mentioned before, I think there's opportunity to have some stronger partnerships with console providers. So with that, I want to say thank you and open it up for any questions.
So I guess my question's around targeting the younger demographic. How would you change your advertising strategy and advertising mix to accommodate your shift to a younger demographic?
I think the first thing, as I mentioned, was the student discounts. So actually having that lower price point that you can proactively offer them a better value. I think the other way, was through those console providers. I think the younger demographics are more likely to be playing video games, so using Xbox Live, using PlayStation, Nintendo. So having those stronger partnerships so that when they buy an Xbox game, there's something in there about MLB TV. Just any way to target the gamer as well, because that's one of the medium they're watching.
Sorry, I actually meant the advertisers who you target.
So I think there's a way to, you can look at media properties that line up well with those demographics. I think the strategy we were thinking of, kind of thinking about our own experience, would draw more on kind of using a grassroots model to get more attention from people. So one of the things that we notice up in New Hampshire is that the ski areas give out student discounts, and the season passes are significantly discounted versus the full season passes. And the way they price those is you have to be on the National Registry of Students, but the way they distribute it is they actually have student organizations, so the ski club will help market these things, but they market it to the entire student body. And so you keep it within the community, and you don't have to pay kind of your local representative anything. You just have to be in communication with them. And we think that would be something that would be fairly easy to do in terms of accessing these evangelists on college campuses.
When you guys are looking at targeting the younger audience and growing that, did you look at specific devices that we should target them on, more mobile-related products, or were you looking at it as a whole? Can you repeat that? Sorry. As when you guys were looking at the younger demographics and targeting offers for them, were you looking at or recommending any specific of our vehicles that we deliver the content to?
I think that we didn't quite have the granularity in the data to get that deep into it. Mostly we recognize that segment is a little bit underpenetrated relative to some other segments, and identified it as a segment that's relatively easy to price discriminate in and have promotions that are limited to that segment. So the answer, I guess, is no.
One of the questions that I have, obviously you guys were not provided with sponsorship revenue, but one of the issues with discounting the CPN so heavily is that you get into the sponsor conflict category. And so we generate a lot of revenue in sponsorship as well. If you start lowering the CPMs and you really want to take advantage of trying to get the inventory to the numbers that you guys are talking about, you wind up with a whole lot more conflicts where somebody's paying a premium for a sponsorship and then they're getting dramatically undercut by a remnant ad, not even remnant, just a discounted ad by a competitor inside of the same product. And so what do you guys think about how the sponsorship element factors into what you could actually do on the ad side, both from a price standpoint and also from a shrinking the available inventory that's out there because of sponsor conflict?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, and it was one we considered when we were working through the analysis. Because as you said, the data we had was fairly limited and didn't let us do kind of a full value to the sponsor analysis either, which is, I think, the way that you would want to look at it. So you would want to get a sense of the total value that the sponsor provides to MLB, and then kind of think about whether or not it makes sense to even, if there's certain rivals of theirs that you just don't consider selling to. And so obviously that might mean utilization is lower, but I think we would incorporate that in the category of analysis, which would look at kind of both the internal value of an ad space, and then the value of that space kind of across the MLB system, if that makes sense.
I have one more question as well. Just a point of clarification, you guys were talking about trying to link it to the EDU email address, so the notion is if you have an EDU email address, that's how you would gate the access to the. What about the 3.7 million teachers that are out there that also have that, and that effect on cannibalization of the existing product?
That's a great question, and to my earlier point, I mean, there is a national registry of students, so if a small ski mountain can do it, I mean, I think that's something that would be fairly easy to tie into your systems.
And I think further, I mean, if teachers are on MLB TV, I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if it's driving, discussion of MLB TV at school, that's still growing the overall customer base and excitement among younger demographics. So,
thank you very much, guys. Finally, we have Columbia Business School, represented by Martin Kleinbard and Alex Zakim.
Thank you so much for having us. Alex and I are here to share with you what we believe to be an easily implementable strategy that will increase MLB TV's customer base by over 50% and increase its revenue by over 30% in 2013. We're going to take our presentation time to briefly go over the highlights of our findings and yield the rest of our time to more specific questions. The goal of this project was to find ways to increase MLB TV's revenues and subscription base. And to do this, we formulated 2 hypotheses and tested each empirically. The first hypothesis was to eliminate subscription fees altogether and rely solely on advertising. We found that while this did increase subscriptions significantly, it actually did not increase revenue, so we rejected this hypothesis. Our second hypothesis was to create an optimal pricing model for subscriptions. We found that by employing this optimal model, we could increase subscriptions and revenues significantly. We also touched upon a few issues of price discrimination on the basis of customer demographics and device type. Now Alex is going to explain to you a little bit about how we came about the methodology for our 2 hypotheses.
Thanks, Martin. So to start formulating our hypotheses, we started by looking at the revenue streams for MLB TV over the past couple of years. And one thing that really stuck out to us was that only about 20% of the revenue comes from ads, and there's a lot of white space or unpenetrated ad potential out there. So in our process, we started by looking at the idea of an advertising-only revenue model for Major League Baseball TV. One of the attractive things about this model is that you would expect the subscribers' numbers to increase dramatically. What we were interested in is, correspondingly, how much revenue can you grow by having that increased subscriber base? What we did was we looked at a bunch of different scenarios where we looked at the number of increased folks you'd have watching the service, increasing the ad space filled, and increasing the CPMs. On the right side of the screen, you can see that only a couple of the far bottom right boxes are green, and that indicates that only under our most aggressive assumptions did we feel we could even match the revenue for last year. So that led us to reject the hypothesis that an advertising-only model would yield growth in the revenue base. As a result, we then decided to look at a subscription fee-based opportunity to grow the business. We created a linear regression model using price, time of the year variables, and the flash sales that you guys have run to figure out what you would predict the daily subscriptions to be. Once we had established this model, we then ran an optimization to figure out what the ideal price and subscriber trade-off would be to maximize profit each week of the season. Martin's going to walk you through some of the results that we found.
So again, our key question here was, is MLB TV currently priced at an optimal level? And we found that the answer was, for the most part, no. Actually, by running our optimization models, we found that MLB TV could stand to increase its revenue and its subscription base significantly by, in general, reducing its price to the levels that we propose. Now, you're probably going to ask, by how much will it increase this revenue and subscription base? Well, here you can see our projections compared to the 2012 baseline. And regardless of the models that we used, we found that revenues would be increasing by approximately 30%, or $40 million from 2012, and number of subscribers would be increasing by approximately 650,000, which is a 50% increase from 2012.
So in addition to these main areas we looked at for revenue and subscriber growth, we also looked at some opportunities to target folks more specifically. One thing we found really interesting was the growth both in fan engagement overall over the last year, as well as the rapid shift to other devices besides traditional web-based players. We feel there's an opportunity to charge incremental fees for using multiple devices, but we also realize that there's some risk of increased price driving folks away. We feel there's an opportunity here, but that this is an area that warrants further investigation as a revenue source for MLB TV. In addition, we also looked at demographic targeting to try to more aggressively target the folks that are most likely to sign up for MLB TV. We looked at the MLB.com visitor data and created an avidity index looking at how often folks visit as well as how long they spend on the site. And we found that there's a clear opportunity to target several different groups, like, for example, males aged 12 to 17 and folks with household income of 40 to 60,000. And that the amount of avidity varies dramatically across these groups. Again, we feel this is a big opportunity for MLB TV, but this also warrants some further research.
In conclusion, we recommend that MLB TV adopt our optimal pricing model, which again, we project will increase the subscriber base by over 50% in 2013 and the revenue stream by over 30%. We also recommend that MLB look into pilot programs to investigate the price discrimination strategies that we just mentioned in the areas of device type and customer demographics. Thank you so much for your time, and we yield the rest of our time to questions.
Thank you, guys. Could you give me a little more detail on your optimal price model? Like, what did you base the fact that lowering the price would increase subscribers so dramatically, and where did you end up as an optimal price in order to get that increased revenue that you spoke of?
Sure, I can start, and then you can jump in when you think is appropriate. So much like the Chicago team, actually, we were looking at price per days remaining as one of the key levers to drive what optimal prices would be. So when we ran this regression, this gave us this gave us the number of subscribers that you would be able to have for any given number of those input variables. We then used the Premium Solver in Excel to run an optimization model with revenue at the end of the season, annual revenue as the objective function, and daily prices as the decision variables. Now, because we know it's not realistic to change your price every single day, we set a stipulation that price could only change at most once per week. And as you can see, actually, it would usually change about once every 3 weeks or so, according to our model. We also put in a stipulation that the price had to be a round number, had to be a multiple of 5, because you're not going to charge $39.62. And so again, when we ran those models and projected them on a baseline, a conservative, and an aggressive stance, we came up with fairly similar revenue models. Is there anything else that you wanted to know that we didn't answer there?
Yeah, thanks. And it may be that we didn't give you all the data, but I guess how do you reconcile that with the fact that, we have over the years increased our price and increased our subscribers, so that we haven't seen a decrease in subscribers with a higher price? What makes us think that a decrease in price would lead to such substantial subscriber growth?
So you're basically asking about elasticity. Why do we think that it's going to grow by so much by further lowering the price when you're seeing growth?
Right, because it seems like that burden of once you take out it's hard to get somebody to take out their credit card and pay, but for the people that have, really, they seem somewhat inelastic to us. So I'm surprised by the, 2 out of the 3.
Right, and Martin, will you go back to that slide for a second? I mean, if you look at the optimal pricing, the optimal pricing by week, we actually recommend that you increase the price right at the beginning of the season, because we feel like those customers are very inelastic. So there is an opportunity to still get to a higher subscriber base and charge higher prices at some times during the season. But we feel like offering a significantly lower price during the preseason before spring training starts or later on in the season will give you an opportunity to increase.
Wait, so your optimum price is $160 at the beginning of April and then dropping at $80?
Right.
Yes, sir. Okay. Would you like us to discuss the methodology about that?
So towards the end of the season, how would you prevent cherry picking of folks who are just tuning in for playoff runs and losing, potentially cannibalizing all the folks who might have bought at the mid-season point, which I believe is the current model? Is you can't.
We drop it monthly, but yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just for a point of clarification, when are you allowed to get postseason coverage on MLB TV? I actually don't know the answer to that.
By playoff runs, I just mean
the pennant race. Okay, because I sorry, but you're not allowed to get playoff coverage with MLB TV, correct?
No, that's on
okay.
broadcast.
So the question is, what's to prevent people from cherry picking? Well, again, this is just based on what customer demand was. There are a lot of people who will want to buy for the entire season. So I think you're just segmenting your customer base. I don't think you call that cherry picking. I think that's just different people with different demand. It's just price discrimination. Not everyone's willing to pay for first class in an airplane. It's a similar idea.
But my understanding that the lowest price that you guys go to now is that mid-season price, right? It doesn't continue to drop week by week to the end of the year.
We do drop it.
So,
and there was the flash sale right at the end of August, which brought in a ton of folks as well, right? Yeah. So that kind of lets them get in for the pennant race in a sense.
Right. I mean, towards the end of it, it starts to flatten out. It looks a little bit more like what we actually charge. Like in September, it is effectively the monthly fee.
Right.
Is what winds up happening. So that part of it makes sense. But if you're, for example, let's pretend that this model existed for a year, and so we did it for a year. Yep. On the second year, what makes you think that the people that bought on the 19th aren't going to just say, I'm going to wait till the 20th?
No, that's a great question, and I'm really glad you brought that up. Obviously, your model would have to you would have to create a certain degree of unpredictability so that the next year that wouldn't be able to be possible. But you're 100% right, and you're absolutely right that that's an area for further research.
Right. Okay, so I also have a follow-up question. Given the exercise was for revenue generation, optimizing revenue, but there's also a cost component of all this, right, which we didn't give you guys. And so the notion is that, there's a cost of goods sold metric that goes into this whole thing as well. And when the price goes down, the cost of goods sold stays fixed, and the subscribers go up, then we still have a lot more expenses to it. So how do you guys reconcile that aspect of it?
Yeah, that was something we worried a lot about because we didn't have the costs, and that was one of the big questions we had for further research. I mean, are the costs substantially greater for adding these, this extra number of customers?
Well, it's variable, right? So you pay for CDN, you pay for bandwidth, you pay for things like that, and so the more subscribers you have, the costs go up. And so, the question becomes the avidity and the utilization of those subscribers. If everybody was on the low end of the utilization scale because the price was lower, so you're getting more casual fans, then the costs are there, but they're not as extreme. But if you wound up getting a whole slew of folks that were very into it, and the avidity was very high, and they were going to access the product a lot, then you would really wind up cutting your margin by massive percentages.
Right, so you're saying that because you're going to have so many more people and you're charging at lower price on average, you're going to have lower margins across the board.
You're always going to have lower margins, but the question becomes like the avidity of the fan that you're getting, right? So like the one thing that's not in this model at all is how people are going to use the product. So you only focused on pricing. There was no real utilization curve.
Right.
Like some of the other analysis took into account how people actually access the product, not just bought it. And so that would be a factor to sort of, even without knowing what the costs are, you can impute the relative, you could impute what you would expect that the utilization curve would be as to why these people would be coming on at the lower price point. Because these are 700,000 people that didn't find the value prop in the past, and so presumably they would find a better value prop, but are they avid or are they casual? And we just got through the threshold of pricing. That would be the question.
And I think to answer that last point, if you were to couple our research on pricing strategy with some of the questions that we had in the end about price discrimination based on customer demographic, you could be seeing where are these new customers coming from, and you could be tracking their spending habits throughout the season. In terms of your question about marginal cost, we completely agree that that needs to be taken into account. If we were able to estimate marginal cost, we would have absolutely put it in. However, the question that we were presented with was about revenue, and we did want to answer that question as faithfully as we could. We understand that further research should be necessary to maximize profit, which is obviously the ultimate goal.
All right, thank you very much, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right, I'd like to thank the teams one more time for coming up here and presenting to all of us. For those of you interested, we'll be announcing the winners tomorrow at the closing ceremonies, the Alpha Awards, and you'll get to see which NBA team the judges thought did best. Thank you very much for coming.